Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today, we're diving into something that we all wrestle with: self-criticism. Why do we do it? What purpose does it serve? And could it actually be helping us in unexpected ways? We're unpacking that and more with someone who's been there right from the beginning of compassion-focused therapy. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Mary Welford, clinical psychologist, CFT author, trainer, and one of the founding members of the Compassionate Mind Foundation. In her recent blog, Mary reflects on her early encounters with Professor Paul Gilbert's work on shame and self-criticism, and how those experiences helped shape both her clinical direction and the development of CFT itself. Mary is the author of three wonderful books: The Compassionate Mind Approach to Building Self-Confidence, Compassion Focused Therapy for Dummies, and The Kindness Workbook with Elaine Beaumont, all of which have guided countless people in understanding their inner critic and cultivating more compassionate ways to relate to themselves. This conversation is full of warmth, wisdom, and a few surprises about what self-criticism may be trying to do. And so I bring you Dr. Mary Welford. Great. Okay. Well, Dr. Mary Welford, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Stan.
Lovely to get to chat with you. And I did read from you recently a blog that you wrote for the Balanced Minds website, I guess. Yeah, it just really sort of struck a chord. I mean, that was you started talking about how you really discovered Paul Gilbert's work, I guess, sort of early on, and especially some of the work around shame and self-criticism. And I guess I wondered whether you could take us back, first of all, to sort of that moment or around that time. Like what was happening in your clinical work, I guess, or that made CFT or what was to become CFT perhaps feel like it was the missing piece there.
Yeah. I suppose I'd completed my clinical training and I went into a department where we had a very long waiting list. And one of the things that I found that really hard. I found it was at the time where you had physical files, so it wasn't even a database. You had this presence of this filing cabinet,
Hmm.
um, multiple filing cabinets with literally people in it. And so I found that really difficult. And with the help of people like Adrian Wells, or who was very well known in a metacognitive therapy, where what we set about, a number of us, to do was to go through the filing cabinet and pull together everybody who maybe was referred with depression, everybody who was referred with social anxiety, everybody who was referred with, kind of PTSD. And we looked at, well, we developed research where we would see all of those people. So we had kind of like case series.
Oh,
So
yes.
and the thing is that I love CBT. I love it. And it was a very metacognitive CBT approach to things. I love it because it gives me a protocol,
Yeah.
because it kind of, there is, at the end of therapy, hopefully people have a method by which they can address things going forward, etc. And certainly it was, you know, looking at the research, looking at the outcomes that we had, it was transformational for some people.
Hmm.
So some people really did well at 3, 6, 12-month follow-up. However, there was that didn't, kind of like see the whole picture. So the whole
Hmm.
picture actually involved, there was a lot of people who never came onto the research because they had lives that were messy, and maybe they had multiple things going on, or people who came onto the trials and would say, intellectually, I get it. It doesn't make a jot of difference to how I feel.
Mm.
So I know that, for example, it's very unlikely that I'll have a panic attack or that people will reject me. I know that I'm loved, I know that I'm cared for, and yet I still feel like it, I'm not loved, I'm not cared for, there's something wrong with me. So all of these different things, you'd have people who would do well during the course of the therapy, and then at 3, 6, 12 months, they'd crash and burn. So I suppose that I felt as if I had tools, I had a way of working that would be helpful to some people, and that's great. However, I want to turn my attention to those who it wasn't cutting the mustard, as we might say. It wasn't kind of like landing, it wasn't doing something. And I remember going along to a British Association for Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapies conference, so a BABCP. And I'd been along to lots of the CBT trainings and workshops, and I wanted to do something different. And there was just this, title, CBT, as it was called then, for shame and self-criticism. And there was something about it that I thought, number one, I quite like novelty. Number two, actually, that resonates with
Mm.
me, and some of the kind of like the things that I was finding more tricky to address and with people and also with myself. And I went along and just, I suppose, sat, and it stopped me in my tracks. I suppose
Mm.
that was the thing. I went from going to other presentations during the course of the conference, etc., and learning and intellectualizing and writing lots of notes and thinking, oh, actually, yes, I could do this and I could do that with that person, to being in a workshop that stopped me in my tracks. And
Mm.
it was an experience. And that fundamentally changed things for me. It was just something about, okay, so what is this about? And I think that then, no doubt, yes, I went away with skills and tools that I could use. It was more about the experience of it.
Mm.
And then it was that I wanted to learn more about, experience more about, and also share.
Mm. The fascinating thing there is that it was your own experience of moving from knowing to feeling.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this was exactly one of the things that had been a challenge, I guess, for your work with clients and patients. And so there was something very, yes, it was just it stopped you in your tracks. It just kind of inspired so much possibility, I suppose, just that experience, that kind of felt sense of what it's like to make a shift. I really
Yeah.
relate to things like, you mentioned the wait list problem too. When people are put on a wait list, they tend to just wait, and then
Yeah.
and so change is hard. And then when they come, sometimes the CBT was working very well, and then other times there was this sort of, I think they call it sort of the head heart lag type of an experience where the feeling wasn't quite there, and that was what, perhaps, I guess it was Paul's workshop offered you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's something about, again, when you're working in research. So, I was working in clinical department. We were still seeing general waiting lists, but we were also parallel to that doing the research. The, when you are delivering, evaluating an approach, you have really got to stick to they're kind of like the protocol, and
Mm.
and there is a finite amount of appointments, as there is nowadays anyway in lots of services. But maybe at that time that was a bit different. So we're talking about this being early 2000s, where there wasn't as much emphasis on a finite amount of appointments within clinical services. But it also made sense to me about those, I suppose, as a clinician, those sessions that you have where you think that was really important. I think that was pivotal. And yet I wouldn't be able to write down at the time why it was.
Hmm.
I couldn't operationalize necessarily why certain experiences were, or the wording around it, were helpful to people. And again, what CFT gave me is an explanation of why those sessions maybe had been important. It was about de-shaming.
Hmm.
It was about understanding that we are, kind of like bullying ourselves, and not in an
Mm.
intellectual way, but in a moving way. It was about tuning in to distress. And of
Mm.
course, on, kind of like CBT, you can, on CBT evaluations, you can think of that as being, appropriate emotional expression, as being, kind of like part of CBT. I'm 100% not saying that these things are not part of CBT, whereas CFT puts them front and center,
Mm.
for me anyway.
You sort of mentioned how you might divvy up the list in terms of diagnostic categories and things like that. Uh, so how did you start sort of seeing people differently, or perhaps formulating them differently and that sort of thing, as you kind of move towards this lens of understanding more sort of transdiagnostic concepts like shame and self-criticism and so on?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you always have got to. So my natural instinct would be not to divvy up,
Mm.
kind of like to, however, when you're in a service and you need, kind of like resources, and that you need to do something different other than just taking the next person. That's what led to us thinking, right, let's do some research. Let's get more people to the table. Let's go through ethics. Let's do all of these different things so that we can work through that. But my natural instinct maybe was to, connect with the human being,
Mm.
and to notice the similarities between. But again, I suppose, the strap line for CFT has become and remains, an approach for working with shame and self-criticism. So that becomes the focus. That becomes the thing, that the areas that I'm tracking, because fundamentally I do believe that those things are really, really important. So it's not me kind of, I don't know, trying to shoehorn my, what would it be, trying to shoehorn people into a therapy. I just fundamentally believe that shame and self-criticism, can like underpin so much psychological distress.
Mm.
And again, when I talk about the strapline of CFT, sometimes the term self-criticism can, in actual fact, it can sometimes not focus, therefore, or on other ways of self-relating. So even though the strapline is about self-criticism, actually it's more than that. Kind of like there's all manner of different ways that we can relate to ourselves that can be problematic.
Mm.
um so there is a it becomes focused, but then there's also a broadening around that, and the
Mm.
different ways that we might feel shame, experience that, the different ways that we can relate to ourselves, which is often referred to in CFT terms as self-criticism, but it could be self-loathing. It could be an anxious kind of like way of relating to ourselves. So yeah, that's the lens that I now, and have done for a long time, focus.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, that piece there really helps me actually. I thank you for that last little insight because I had a client this week who we were doing a bit of the model and talking a little bit about self-criticism and was that sort of a thing and so on and he really uh, sort of brought a more nuanced look at it. He was sort of like, it's not really self-criticism per se, it's more self-doubting. And as we
yeah,
unpacked it, I thought, actually, yeah, I can see what he means there. That they're kind of still in those self-conscious emotions and the self-to-self relating that is kind of in that social threat sort of part of things. But
yeah,
it's kind of overlapping but distinct as well. So yeah, what you were saying there about how it brings focus and broadening, I think that's really
yeah,
really clever.
yeah. Yeah. Well, kind of like the thing is that when we train people in CFT, one of the things that, and this is largely clinicians, but not exclusively, one of the exercises that we do is or invite people to think about a situation where they've maybe had a go at themselves, maybe things haven't gone so well, um, that's been tricky, and thinking about if they could see that part of them as separate to them, what would they look like? What would their facial expression be? And so it's an awareness building exercise. And one of the questions that then it asks is, what emotions is it directing your way?
Hmm.
And then kind of like we finish the exercise, we do something else, and then go through a list of questions. And again, there are a lot of people who will say anger.
Hmm.
They will say the gestures of finger wagging, the face is scowling, all of these different things. And in an audience of people that we're training, there are also maybe more of a disgust, or a disappointed way, or an anxious, or a doubting.
Hmm.
These are the things that actually people bring. So I do kind of, I think, to only look for the self-criticism is maybe, even though that's often the dominant one,
Hmm.
actually it hones it down. And yeah, the language of your person who you're speaking to
Hmm.
about doubt has meaning to them.
Hmm.
So actually, then it's about exploring that, and using that language, and dropping the self-criticisms or self-critic and things like that. And what would you therefore call it?
Hmm.
Because then if we're aware of it, and maybe we can formulate what that is about, where that comes from, what function it's serving, or what function you want it to serve, kind of like, or
Hmm.
hoping that it serves, then you can start to work with that.
Hmm. Yes, really understanding the motives behind it, sort of thing, and those bits and pieces. It was very interesting because as he and I went on to speak, uh, one of the functions I think of the self-doubting was to keep a little bit buried some anger that actually was there, but not so much directed as at himself, but directed at the way he felt he had been kind of, treated by others, and he had been, because of his doubting though as well. He'd been a bit self-sacrificing, and he found it hard to back himself or be assertive. And so it really was all part of, like you say, a kind of multi-mind, multifaceted experience for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a little part of the blog where you talk about, I think it was CFT for dummies. You were talking about a book with Paul, and I don't know. There was something like that was there in your mind. I suspect, like a sort of a sort of a worry, not wanting to be, putting it self promotion, or putting yourself forward too much, and Paul just sort of said, well, it's not about you. It's about the book, and the ideas there in the book, which I just thought was there's so much kind of wisdom wrapped up in that little statement, this sort of reframing statement. What did you notice there, I guess, in terms of your relationship? Was self-criticism in that mix? Was it perhaps an adjacent kind of a thing? Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
I think I've done really quite well out of being really quite brutal with myself.
Okay.
I kind of think that I grew up being really harsh on myself. Lots of social comparison, lots of looking at myself and kind of like not liking myself or aspects of myself and wanting
Mm.
to be different. And this is the thing. It did me quite well. Kind of like I
Okay.
did use it to motivate myself or to organize myself in certain ways. So, I would sometimes to get things done or to change things, I would be quite brutal with myself, adapting myself to social situations, all manner of different things. And with that comes, of course, some degree of shame. If you knew certain things about me, you wouldn't like me. There's something fundamentally wrong. Or other people seem to have it okay and there's something flawed, kind of like, and as I say, I'm articulating it. We know that shame is a felt experience, so I'm trying to map words onto that. But yeah, I grew up really being quite brutal with myself and feeling shame,
Mm.
and therefore contorting, performing, adjusting myself. And so the thing is that I managed to get through clinical training. I managed to do a degree, my first degree. I managed to develop friendships, have relationships. I also, though, really struggled in certain areas. So I actually would have times where I was really quite anxious. I'd have times when I was really quite low. I'd have times when I would have real struggles with body image and all sorts of different things. So yes, it was serving a function, kind of like in some respects. Um, and I do think that, when people say, well, it serves no function at all, actually it was serving a function. It was the only skill set that I had,
Mm.
and it was doing me okay, in a sense, but it had all of these, kind of like negative consequences to it.
Mm.
And I would just feel unsettled socially at times and things. So as I said at the start, CBT gave me a toolkit. It gave me something that I still to this day, tools that are really, really important within, kind of like my clinical work. Was I using them on myself? No.
No.
I wasn't kind of doing a downward arrow and, challenging my thoughts and things because I knew that they were there and they were so familiar to me. And classic CBT, we are building an alternative, kind of like quite often we are building an alternative, but I had no Velcro to stick that on,
Hmm.
so I could come up with, oh yeah, kind of like, yeah, I believe that certain, kind of like 80%, 90%, etc. It wouldn't make a difference to me. And I think that, so therefore, CFT, the introduction of CFT was also a journey for me about, it's like layers of the onion, where something's landing with you and you're curious about it and you play around with the ideas and you apply it a bit, and then you know you go a bit deeper and a bit deeper and a bit deeper and a bit deeper, and yeah, I get to the point at which I've written one book, I've written a second book, and Paul
Actually, it
is
was the first book, wasn't it? It was the first book that actually that
yeah,
one
it
was
was
about.
like, yeah, it kind of like, but I, kind of like still when it's that work in
Still there.
progress
Okay.
type
Yeah.
thing. And I think this is why we need others. This is why we, you can do lots and lots of work on ourselves. We still need others to point things out. So yeah, so how that actually happened was, so Paul used to come around because I was fascinated about the CFT stuff, and as a person who coordinated training in the Northwest region, whenever we had committee meetings and they were saying which people do you want to kind of like come and present, who should we invite this year, I'd be just saying, should we have Paul Gilbert? And number one, it was because he was a really personable person to come and along. It was no hassle. He would rock up and he would be sociable and easygoing, etc. And also he would do his stuff. He'd also arrive with a bag of books every time. He'd arrive with a bag of books, and he would then kind of like sell them at cost to his audience, and and write in them. And he had kind of like, he enjoyed kind of like writing things in them. And so when it came to me, he said, Mary, can I hope you're going to be promoting this, taking the books round. And I was like, I couldn't do that, Paul. That would just be too much. It'd be too self-promoting. It would just be, I just couldn't do it. It'd be difficult. And he just said, Mary, what does that say about what you think of me?
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
And and it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the book. And I kind of think, so it was those two
Those
things
two
in that
things.
conversation. And of course, I didn't think he was self-promoting. I just thought he was being kind.
Mm.
Kind of like, I thought he was being kind and bringing books up that, we could get cheaper than buying in the bookshop, or something like that. So I was able to clarify that with him. I was able to kind of like say, no, it isn't to you. But yeah, it's not about me. It
Mm.
And I think that's really, really important, being a conduit.
Mm.
That's really important for me about, actually, it isn't about me. I've learned stuff by virtue of my experiences, life experiences, work experiences, sitting with lots of people and talking with lots of people. I've learned lots of things, and therefore it's been a conduit of that. So that's why I like doing training, and I still get anxious, and I still kind of like think to myself, why did I do this? And then I kind of like go, this is why I'm doing it, because I'm a conduit, because I believe passionately in these ideas
Mm. Yeah.
and practices and way of doing.
In that moment, I guess Paul was kind of the compassionate other in a way, being able to speak a little truth there to you or something
Yeah,
like that in a way that was with his characteristic, charm and quirky humor probably and whatever else, and but also yes, the deep wisdom of it, and
yeah,
that compassionate sort of piece was able to kind of come across to you, and you're able to, yeah, sort of reframe things in your own mind. I mean, so many people just grapple with that feeling that the self-criticism and so on is kind of helpful for them.
yeah,
And yeah, we're probably not, it's probably not quite right to try to sort of demonstrate to them that it's completely not, I suppose.
yeah,
There's a, I feel like I relate to that too, the sort of self-criticism and sort of it can certainly be a motivator. It's just that it comes off with the sting in the tail, comes along with a sting in the tail, or um, yeah, trade-offs
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that again, if you're living in a house and it's got a roof, and it's serving kind of like, and it's a bit leaky and it can't, there's problems, things like, do you smash it down or do you
Mm,
try and build it? And the thing is that if we build an alternative, then we might move into that if it's better fit for us. So the thing is that if see, kind of like one of the questions is, would you be interested in, kind of like talking about learning, considering whatever the language is, a different way of relating to yourselves that has the benefits that you attribute to, and some of them might be actually benefits, some of them might not be. Would you be interested in learning or developing or considering a way of relating to yourself that has all of the benefits or all of the without the drawbacks?
mm,
And it's the cultivation of that then, and it's the practice of that, the returning to that, and the strengthening of that then we can move towards it, and we can move towards it more and more. And then eventually that actually becomes our way of relating to ourselves. And every so
mm,
often there's echoes, ever so often, given a certain set of circumstances, we're back and it's noticing. That's where the mindfulness comes in, kind of, and the awareness comes in. It's noticing. Is this, kind of like in a term that's used a lot these days, is this serving me?
mm,
And if you strengthened and built and cultivated an alternative, actually, as well as those relationships around you as well, kind of like, so I, I kind of think that whether it be, the self-help, kind of like literature, which I'm kind of like, I've contributed to, individual therapy, etc., etc. There is sometimes, unfortunately, in my mind anyway, an emphasis on us sorting ourselves out, and us doing the work. And I still think that it's others. It's also that piece about having other people who can assist us, can help us. Because you know what? Sometimes, no matter with all of my practice and imagery and all manner of different things, I still at times need somebody to say, it doesn't matter, or you did the best that you could, or it's understandable that you feel like that, or this is shit, or whatever it is. There is that kind of like need for that, kind of like,
mm,
and that's why, in therapy, we're not just I don't think we're not just thinking about legacy as in what are the tools, what are the practices. It's changing lives, changing relationships,
mm,
so that people have got an external to tap into as well as an internal, you
mm.
know.
I mean, you're really speaking, I suppose, a bit to the three flows in a way there, isn't it? That's why we're really trying to think about being compassionate towards others, but being open to receiving it, and perhaps then the self-compassion piece. With the self-criticism, do you see it as simple as there is kind of like self-improving and or constructive self-criticism, and then there's shame-based or self-hating self-criticism, or is it actually even more complex really than that? That even the shame-based self-criticism can play a function, and it may or may not be something to be rid of, or in fact, is it really just creating a wholly different way to relate to ourselves in those moments?
It, so I don't know.
Hmm.
Okay. So I don't have a, kind of like when you ask that question, I think about me. Okay. And I think about a younger version of me, and my shame, self-criticism meant that what I would do is socially perform. So and of course that is a version of me. Kind of like it's not me becoming somebody else, but certainly I would try and be a social chameleon. Kind of like I would try to perform and adapt, and I would inhibit certain aspects of me and kind of like show other aspects of me because I felt shame about certain things. And I would, kind of like, my mind would be criticizing myself, and then, obviously not necessarily it conscious, but I'll show this side of me. Okay. I've still got really good friends, kind of like who um actually were born of that time, were developed of that time. I have, I did okay at school, kind of like and it's part of my history, kind of like it's part of me. I mean, at a right here, right now level, it it gives me insight into some of the difficulties that other people have had because I've got lived experience of some of those things. So to kind of like see it as being, you know, bad and needs to be eradicated and being playful here,
Yeah.
or, something that would I want that for myself? Kind of like, would I have wanted myself to have a, kind of like a really real supportive relationship with myself? Yes, I most likely would have wanted that for myself. But did it was my best efforts. So I'm not going to say it was bad. It was how I found to be in the world and how I found to be in my head,
Mm.
and it's just part of my history. So when I find myself criticizing myself now, or getting exasperated with myself, or feeling some degree of shame about something, it's strange. I've changed my relationship with it, so I can then smile and go, this is of old. This isn't an echo. It did me okay. Kind of like, but it had really damning side effects. I choose something different.
Uh-huh. Yes.
I choose something different now. So I don't know, maybe I mean, I don't know, maybe I've integrated it as being, actually this is all of me. And that was something that was very dominant,
Mm.
kind of like, in the past, and less so now, but there's still echoes,
Mm.
and it's
Certain. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, it's just part of me.
Mm. And certain aspects continue, like certain aspirations you might have, or goals you want to achieve, or sort of kind of performing at certain levels. And so every now and then there's some of the old scripts come back to mind, and you sort of notice that and kind of give that a nod, but it's not really running the show, I suppose. It's sort of a slightly different approach, a reframe. I think my question came from I was thinking about elite athletes,
Yeah.
and whether there was a level of achievement or performance. And now I'm being a little bit loose with it too, but whether there is a level of achievement or performance that only comes from a certain type of, very harsh and hard self-criticism, or whether that's more just like a sort of a fear of self-compassion thing within me that just assumes that, and there is in fact another route there as well to elite performance.
It's fascinating. So, the thing is that I started working with athletes because I was working in schools and I wanted to make the stuff cool and relevant. And because this psychologist who was working in school, who was doing assemblies and doing collapse times, and also offering one-to-one work, kind of like there was some very open door with that. There was some like, yeah, like I'm in. And then there was a lot of people who were just like, what on earth is this? What is the point in this? So I kind of like decided that I was going to try and get some kind of like elite athletes to come in to school and to talk about some of their stuff. And at the time, again, things converge. So I was doing some work with a sports psychologist as well. And because quite a lot of people would come in through the performance angle, but it was a clinical issue, kind of like, and then they didn't have the skill set maybe to work with the clinical issue. So there was a number of reasons why I started to work with kind of like athletes, and I would always say about young children, learn to support yourself, equip. If I was doing some coaching with kind of like, well, not me doing the coaching, but contributing to the coaching of the kids in school, it would be to learn to support themselves and be their own cheerleader and all of that sort of stuff. So they've got an alternative. So that would be that. But then with the elite athletes, when as a clinician, when you first meet an elite athlete, they have got themselves to a pretty high point. And quite a lot of them are highly self-critical. And they don't want to disrupt. There is can I actually, it's got me to where I am. And you
Almost a
don't want,
superstition, sort of, or something in a way.
well, yeah, kind of like it's, and literally some people will really be, and social media is full, actually, if you look, or certainly my algorithm on it, because I watch it, so therefore it shows me, of athletes kind of like being really harsh with themselves, really pushing themselves, and kind of like, it's done me no harm, and this is how I've done it, and other people have been really brutal with me, and that's been the making of me. So, and who am I to say? Kind of like, that's the thing. Who am I to say? However, when I have somebody in front of me who's also struggling with X, Y, and Z, it comes down to, right, okay, we've got maybe a choice. This has been serving you, and you attribute all of these different things to it. Maybe in a different aspect of your life, you could try something different. kind of like, and maybe starting there, and how is that working for you, and then maybe importing that into their performance sports, and things. But no, kind of like, you get a lot of people who are really, really quite harsh, and some of the, the coaching and those side of, things, you've got some really high profile coaches who've done very well being really ruthless with their
Mm.
squads, with their teams, and then they will attribute the success. Well, it's certain individuals who do well with that type of,
Mm.
coaching. At what cost, of course, I would say. But then what happens to the ones who actually that type of coaching style isn't a good fit for them, because they crumple? It really affects their confidence, therefore their performance, their mindset, all sorts of different things.
Mm.
But I think it's fascinating. And I think,
Yes.
it's that meeting somebody and asking, how's that working for you?
Mm.
What are the drawbacks? And being curious, and not therefore assuming that our work is to change that,
Mm.
and to go alongside somebody and consider, kind of like, speak with them, and introduce something maybe different, a different way
Yes.
of relating to themselves, rather than getting rid of the old way.
Yes, when we say to someone, how's that working for you? It really isn't to. We're not asking that in order to sort of ambush them about how it's not working for them. Like, it's a genuine question, and we really want to understand the many and varied ways that it's sort of come into their life, and how it
Yeah,
has functioned. Like you say, it's often the person sort of doing the best they can with what they've got and what they've been exposed to and learned. And
yeah,
I like that idea though of, um, I guess it's a type of psychological flexibility where we can sometimes approach certain things in a certain way, but maybe there's other areas of your life where, you can try a different approach. Try a different approach over there at home in your relationship, say, even if you continue this current approach in the sport. And I've
yeah.
had a number of people lately who are now kind of retired elite athletes, because often, there's an end point, especially if it's a more physical game or something. And there's a whole lot of unlearning that sort of has to, not has to, but there's an opportunity to kind of unlearn some of that then, now that we're in a whole different phase. And there can be grief there, I think, too, when that people are faced with that kind of unlearning. I've raved on a bit there, but yeah, it's sort of,
No,
like you
I,
say,
I,
very interesting. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly, kind of agree with that. I think, again, people, it's important for us to recognize people live and die being critical of themselves.
Mm.
People live and die not, not, kind of like, accessing, their anger, or, suppressing their anger. And, the thing is that our role, or certainly I think my role, is when I have somebody, who's coming along to see me, by virtue of that, there is something that they're struggling with, kind of
Yeah.
like, and so therefore it's with the knowledge that, I've gained over the years, that, let's problem solve, kind of like around it. Now, there's another part of my work which is not, kind of like what I would call, kind of like acute, well, clinical. I do lots of general population stuff working in the school.
Hmm.
It's general population stuff. And again, it's about sharing ideas and things and examples and practices and psychoeducation and all that sort of thing, so that people have more choice, but not to assume that that's going to land for people or be appropriate for people, etc. And the piece about the self-criticism, I always remember working with a guy, an incredible guy, who had a diagnosis of bipolar, and he'd had some real depressions, and he'd had some real kind of like, as he would call them, highs. And we worked for a period of time, and classic CFT, three circles is a really good fit to understand, the drive, but also the hopelessness, the helplessness. And I had the benefit of seeing him kind of like maybe once a year for about 4 years after we'd seen each other. And he was still somebody who would have mood variations. However, he hadn't had a real big low, and he hadn't had a real big high either, which he was kind of like grateful for, but kind of missed a little bit. And he said to me in our last session, Mary, if it is that bottom line, I've been in bed for a month, because that's what would happen, and not having his windows open, I reserve the right to actually give myself a real hard time, because actually that's what I sometimes in the past I have needed to get up out of the door.
Mm.
And it's kind of like, and it always sticks with, we laughed, and I was like, absolutely, kind of like, actually, I want you to have that as being the option, because I want you to have as many options as you
Options.
can,
Yes. Yes.
but for me to kind of like say, no, but that would mean that that's highly correlated with, this way that we relate to ourselves is highly correlated with this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. Actually, he was just like saying, I reserve the right. And,
Yeah.
we laughed, smiled,
But there's wisdom in it, isn't there? That notion of, yeah, we're trying to build more options really, and the options might be different in different contexts too, or different kind of scenarios, and certain options, and that flexibility to move amongst the options, even if sometimes it means going back to sort of more harsher ways of self-relating, maybe, or but then see how it works and kind of then come back to the newer ways, or yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's really important. It's the contract. If we can have, oh, actually, yeah, I remember that doesn't do me so well. I tried it again, and I'm going to cultivate this one. I'm going to go back to this one. That's really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually, it reminds you then that a more compassionate relationship with ourselves, a more supportive relationship with ourselves and others, and a more real, authentic relationship with ourselves and others is better. But sometimes we
Mm.
need that reminder.
Yes. Yes, it's part of really respecting the person and respecting choices, and a kind of their own discovery of these
Yeah.
things through experience, and really feeling it. Um, a lot of your writing is sort of so nicely grounded and human and relatable, and just as this conversation has felt, actually, just that it's sort of trying to, yeah, not make compassion seem grand and mystical or something, or sort of, but rather, it's often the small things done, consistently, and bringing them into, I guess, our day to day. You've mentioned a couple of your own experiences. I wonder, like, what do you personally practice to sort of cultivate this more compassionate part, or perhaps these compassionate relationships with others in your daily life?
I think in the early days. So if I speak to my journey with that as the
Okay.
kind of like the X factor kind of like way of saying things, but
Yeah.
in the early days, what I needed to do is to keep returning to the training.
Oh.
So, kind of like the thing is, and the conversations, I had the benefit of, there was a number of us who used to meet in Derby before CFT had the kind of like the term CFT. And it was a returning to the, it was the structure of that. It was, kind of like going on training again that I'd been on before.
Mm.
Kind of like to sit, to be, to kind of like connect with the material in a different way. It was also being around other people. And I think that that was really important for me. And I think that's a bit like therapy. Kind of like sometimes we kind of know that something might be helpful to us. We still need the structure. We still need the relationship, I suppose, to remind us, to scaffold, to inhabit a different way of being. And then we go back to our everyday life and we go back to how things are. But it's that returning. So it started off with that.
Mm.
And then I think there was more of, I went on a number of retreats and again immersed myself in different, not CFT ones because we didn't have CFT ones at the time, but compassion retreats and mindfulness retreats and things like that. And I think that's what I need. And then I found that I was sprinkling it into my everyday life.
Mm.
So I just found that what naturally happened is I wasn't somebody who said, I'm going to, set aside 20 minutes every day and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It was actually more of the sprinkling in
Mm.
uh, of things. And so, and now, so your question is around now, is it's I've gone from intellectually understanding it, kind of like sitting with it, practicing it, the structure of it, to actually just being.
Mm.
So because I connect with, I mean, like our jobs is to connect with people. We're practicing it all of the time.
Mm.
Kind of like we're being it all of the time within our sessions in order to get myself into a helpful physiological and cognitive mindset. In between appointments I'm doing little bits of practice.
Mm.
After appointments I'm doing little bits of kind of like, actually, let's just ground myself. Let's just, don't get me wrong, there's times when I'm kind of like, right, I've got to quickly pick up my children or something like that. But that's what I try to do. So now I attach my practices. It's a bit weird, but I attach my practices to everyday activities, like when I'm making a cup of tea or when I'm hanging the washing up,
Mm.
can I act to dry, instead of doing it and thinking to myself, oh God, I've got to get this and done. I drop my shoulders. I hang the washing out. I kind of like do it in that type of way. So it's how I live my life,
Mm.
and again, running training and things like that. Again, that's a great opportunity. Even though I'm doing guided practices with people, I'm doing it as well.
Yeah.
So that's how it is for me now.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's kind of like I don't have to have a formal, and this might be, again, it's what works for me.
Yeah.
And it's not a judgment on anybody else or saying how it should be, but I know people who practice at set times of the day or in the week, or it's just I inhabit it
Mm.
and it's sprinkled in throughout my day and my life.
Yeah, you kind of immersed yourself in it early and went to trainings again and then sort of did the retreats and so on. But it's that sort of learning, practicing, embodying kind of sequence almost, and
Yeah,
getting to a point where it actually sprinkles in or sort of can kind of flavor all sorts of things that we might be doing in the day, including the mundane, the washing or that sort of
yeah,
thing, but
yeah,
also at work and in our work with others or our relationships with others. It just kind of sort of sprinkles in there,
yeah.
you know. Yeah. I had a little insight. I think that I started this YouTube channel podcast, in the same vein, really. I think it was to get the opportunity to just have regular chats with people about compassion, about self-compassion, about all of the really great ways that people are doing it and practicing it in a way to sort of immerse myself as well. We don't have as many training opportunities locally, I guess, in terms of CFT specifically. And so I think, yeah, maybe that was a little bit what was behind it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, and then that structure itself, because I'm sure that, like, I'm not sure, I hazard a guess
Mm,
that the structure of, thinking to yourself, oh, like, who else can I speak to? Can like, I haven't done that, can like, maybe there's been a gap or something like that.
yeah.
The frequency by which you maybe want to get these types of talks out there will set a rhythm in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of like, and this is human beings, isn't it? Kind of like
Mm,
human beings, the whole thing about, religion and all of this is to return to, and to have a structure.
mm,
I'm lucky because, there's a lot of things that focus me to return to. I hazard a guess, if I did a different job, then it might be really helpful for me to, carve out or to protect 20 minutes every day to engage in, kind of like those
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
It's just what works for me.
Mm,
Um, I mean, kind of like, again, it's just an offshoot, might be a cul-de-sac, whatever. But
mm,
when you're saying about, again, our personal practice, so, of course, during the course of this conversation, kind of like my mind goes, oh, is that a good CFT response to something? Or have I gone a bit woolly? Or have I, explained that? Or what would Paul say about me saying, kind of like around this is, these are our minds,
mm,
right? And I go back to that thing of all I can be is representing my perspective where I am right here, right now,
mm,
kind of like, and and that's the thing, that it's not about me. Going back to
mm.
that,
Yeah.
it's not about me. I've had the benefit of all sorts of different experiences, sorts of different training. I've got lived experience of all sorts of different things as well. And this is where I'm at. There's
Mm,
not a right and wrong. And that's what I
mm.
try and, so I'm practicing it even in this
In the
conversation with
moment.
somebody else who's, yeah, in the moment.
Yeah. In every moment, in some
Yeah.
ways. Um,
Yeah.
I'm certainly doing the same.
Yeah.
What's next? Is it how many books have you got now? Is it
Three.
the three of them? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
what's the third one?
So I did the kindness workbook
The
with a
kindness
learning work.
workbook. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, I do actually have that one down there somewhere. Um, is there another book in the future? Is there other things that you're sort of planning on or working towards? What's next?
So I've been writing something now with a lovely, lovely friend and colleague called Nicole Parrish. And we started a book a long time ago. And we keep saying, let's continue with that. And then life gets in the way. And, kind of like, she's had a family and all sorts of, and so that's part written,
Okay,
and it's for primary school, kind of like children.
great.
So it's based on kind of, it's storytelling, it's getting some of the ideas across in hopefully an engaging storytelling way.
Hmm.
Uh, I wouldn't even say watch this space because this has been rumbling for a long while. It
Okay.
might, if I ever finish it. But I don't know. I kind of think I quite like the idea of doing something a lot more general public as well. Kind of like
Hmm.
and my other books are self-help. So, somebody might say, well, your stuff is general public, but I think
Right.
it's still with an angle of addressing a difficulty, kind of like and things. So I
Yeah.
quite like the idea of doing that. But if I don't write anything else, I'm okay with that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I kind of like,
Yeah.
it's the things that are on the horizon. I get very excited about different projects and different things. But I also have a life where, um, I don't know, it's not all about the career side of things. It's about personal, kind of like I've got family and, you know, I've got washing to put out.
Yeah.
I've got a beach to walk up. It's kind of like I've got a stupid amount of life admin, the
Yes.
a kind of so, we'll see.
You actually sound very balanced about all of that. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I think I might try to walk on the beach tomorrow myself. We're at other sides of the world, but we're both right near the
Yeah,
beach, which is funny. But well, Dr. Mary Welford, thank you for all the. Well, there were some great ideas there. I've got heaps of takeaways from that conversation, and but also, yeah, thank you for speaking with me on compassion in a t-shirt.
thank you very much, Stan. It's been lovely.